So, where were you born? When were you born?
Okay, you're really going to the beginning.
Yes.
Okay, I was born in an area in eastern Pennsylvania, in Berks County, which is a rural area. My parents were on a farm, and I was born right next to the base of the Blue Mountains in Pennsylvania. So after a very traumatic birth date, December the 13th, a good time, I was born very premature. Weighed a little over 1 pound, and actually was declared dead. So somehow or another I recovered, and then from there on, it was a bit of a struggle, but that was farm life. We lived on a farm that did not have electricity, and everything was manual, and it was kind of a grassroots existence, in which I endured and struggled along with everybody else in the family.
What year was that?
Oh, you're asking for my age. Okay, that was 1934. I turned 84 just a few weeks ago.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
What do you attribute your vitality and youthfulness to after 84 years of trying it out?
Well, I somehow or another, in spite of the difficulties that I had as a child, and I did have some serious problems physically, I developed a survivor attitude. Everything had to be, I gotta survive, I gotta survive, I gotta push, push, push. And of course, that might have been prompted a lot by the farming environment where I'm close to nature all the time. And I see the cycles of life and death. And I didn't want to be caught up in the death cycle with animals and whatever. So I had very close to basic roots of living and dying, in fact. So I think that motivated me to really get as strong as possible, was physically and mentally, psychologically. And I did everything I could to advance physically. And initially I was very weak and small. And ultimately I actually became part of the high school wrestling team. So I did move up in strength ultimately, but it took a long time. So I think it was that early life, being exposed to a real tough environment with no electricity and just basics in the farm, just a little stove and whatever. So it was a tough life for my parents and of course for me too.
Did you? How did you read at night? What did you use for light?
We had for at night the lighting. We only really needed this in the winter months, because in the summertime, the sunset dictated when we retired, basically. But at night, in the wintertime, we had kerosene lights, and it was little small lights that you put on a table. It held kerosene. You're familiar with kerosene lighting. So that was how we lit the place. And then there was a lantern type device that pulled down from the ceiling. And that was it. That was our lighting in the house. Only one room was lit, the kitchen area, and where we ate, which was right next to the kitchen. So it was very basic, very simple.
Did you have an outhouse?
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the struggles of the winter living in that part of the country.
Oh.
We just had minus 15 degrees here, and there were times back in the 30s and 40s when the temperature got that cold in Pennsylvania, and I can remember those nights. Yeah, very well. We did have that facility in the end of the garden.
And then, did you bathe in have a basin and sponge bath, or how did people bathe?
Our bathing was really basic. A basin and a tub. That was it. Hot water off the stove, sponge it, sit in it or stand in it, whatever is appropriate. Splash around, and that's it. Get out in a hurry, particularly in the wintertime, or you'll get too cold too quick.
And
so that was it.
Did you have siblings?
I had a sister, younger, a year and a half younger than I. I also had an older sister, 12 years older, but I really didn't know her because she had left the area, the house, by the time I remembered anything. So that was pretty much my sister and I, and my two parents, and that was the household.
Do you know your Myers-Briggs personality type or Enneagram?
I just looked through my files, and to my surprise, I found my folder. I did take the MBTI. I'm not sure if it was the short or the long version. It had 70 questions.
I think that's a short.
The MBTI was, I'm reading here, EIFP. That was it, EIFP.
You know, everybody is an I that I've interviewed so far that knows their score, which makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway, that was my schedule, my results of that test. So I don't remember how long ago I took it, but I remember going through those questions, and they were kind of enjoyable. I enjoyed taking that test.
Yeah.
I didn't quite know what to make of it, but that was the result that came out of it.
I think it's very useful, and the book Please Understand Me has like 3 or 4 pages about each type. So if you get curious, that's the easiest way that I found to understand it.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah. So when you were in high school, what encouraged you to go to college and study engineering, and how did you study with a kerosene lamp?
Okay, by the time I got to high school, my parents actually had moved off the farm. So by that time, I really did have light at night. We had electricity. But during elementary school, that was not the case. And I went to a one-room country schoolhouse. One room, 8 grades. And typically, there was only 2 students in my class, all the way from 1st to 8th. So it was quite an experience going to school there in that environment. But what motivated me, I think, as far as I remember, to really get interested in science, were some books in the library, what little library we had in that elementary school. We couldn't have had more than 24 books. But they had to do with exploration, and I really got into them. And I felt exciting. It was exciting to read those books. I could feel like I was with the explorers. And of course, at the farm, I look around and I see nature all around me. I see birds flying. And I wondered how they did that. How can birds fly? So I think that got me into ultimately the science of flight. What is aerodynamics ultimately? In high school, I did real well in physics and naturally gravitated toward aeronautical engineering and then later physics. So it was those books from elementary school with the exploration theme, even though they had to do with the Arctic regions. I was very interested in that, and that influenced my life too, in surprising ways later on. Because when I finally had the time to have extra time to myself, I actually went into the Arctic regions in canoe trips. So I actually became kind of an explorer, delayed, so to speak, of the real world in remote regions. But my interest in science had more to do with the flight business, and also with what I actually experienced as a child and I couldn't really understand, and that was dreams. I had a very good dream life as a child, and I only recently learned that babies normally have like a 50% time in what's called rapid eye movement sleep, which is when you dream, but premature babies are up to like 80 to 90%. So I was really high on the dream scale, even though I only remembered a few from the very beginning. And in fact, one of the early dreams, now that I think back, well, I did this years ago when I had words to think about it, was more like an out-of-body experience while I was still quite young, looking at myself from a distance. So I had that experience before I really understood what it was. And later on, I couldn't even talk to anybody about it because nobody could explain what that experience was other than it was fantasy. Of course, much later on, I learned that this is not fantasy. It is a valid experience. So all those combined things, observing nature and even experiencing this unusual visionary stuff from within, the dreams, kind of led me into discovery. The discovery ideas is what's in science. Then later on, I actually switched more or less to the psychological side. What really are dreams? And I started studying dreams and taking a lot of care to record my own dreams from that time on too. So the two came together: dreams, internal, flight, external, from birds and things.
Where did you go to university?
I went to the Pennsylvania State University in the middle of Pennsylvania, and also later Drexel University in Philadelphia for my degree in physics. The one at Penn State was in aeronautical engineering, and the one in Drexel was for physics.
And that was your master's?
Yes, correct.
Mm-hmm. And then did you work as a physicist?
Initially, I worked as an aerospace engineer, because right after graduation, I transitioned right into industry and worked for the Glenville Martin Company in Baltimore, Maryland. And ultimately, I worked on the Gemini space program, the space capsule program, the Earth's orbiting capsule. It had 2 astronauts, so I was on that program. I also worked in advanced design parts of the organization for coming up with future designs of new missiles and airplanes, and actually was involved in the beginning of the space shuttle program. Even though the technology wasn't there at the time, it took another 15 to 20 years for that to go forward. So after the aerospace work, and I transitioned to government, where I took a position with the Foreign Technology Division in Dayton, Ohio, as an analyst, trying to figure out what the Soviet Union was doing in terms of missiles and airplanes. I then picked up a physics degree too, to supplement my other degrees, because it turned out physics was very helpful in allowing me to broaden my background and get involved in more than an engineering kind of profession. So I was very grateful that I took the split degrees rather than stay in one career course.
And then how did you get involved with Stargate and Stanford Research Institute?
Well, when I moved to Dayton, Ohio from Baltimore, where the Martin Company was located at the time, and my initial duties at the Foreign Technology Division on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was to prepare trends and forecast studies that attempted to foresee what the Soviets would be doing in the next 5 to 10 years. Mm. So we were using all the technical data that we could get, the overhead photography, everything that intelligence data could provide, in order to estimate the upcoming new programs that the Soviet Union had. And in one of my routine reviews of the Soviet literature, I just happened to come across their work on ESP, extrasensory perception, and I became very intrigued at that time. The Soviet Union is studying ESP, and it was by serious researchers. And of course, I had been kind of thinking about it over the years, but not very intently. I was aware of J.B. Rhine's work at Duke University with the card paradigm, the 5 symbols.
And so he started that in the 1930s, right?
Right. Through 1930 and 1940, that was the heyday of that work. I didn't really get to know about that until much later. Actually, at the time I joined the Foreign Technology Division, it was the first time I really became aware of that work. And then, of course, I had a little bit of background. When I found the Soviet work, I wrote a small report on that and submitted it through the chain of command at my place, along with the other forecast documents I was working on, which were the usual, as we call it, usual forecast work, coming out of a methodology that we had developed for forecasting new systems. So I just added it to that. And to my surprise, the commander liked it and asked me to follow the work in the Soviet Union. And then by chance, you might say, Hal Putoff at SRI just happened to come knocking at the door looking for funding. And here the commander already had a heads up on the topic, even though I was not aware of Hal's detailed work. I had not even really heard of the term remote viewing at the time. So they put the two together. They called me in to look at the proposal. And I said, yeah, this looks like it's something we should take a look at from both understanding the Soviet work, because I already had reports laying on their desk, but also to see what the Air Force might be able to do ultimately if remote viewing, as Hal Putoff called it, if that really was true and reliable, what could the Air Force do with it? So that led to the first contract with SRI from the Department of Defense. And I was given the role as contract manager, and that's how I got into it from the government side through the Air Force at the Foreign Technology Division. Then the rest just developed.
Well, then did you end up moving to the Bay Area to work with the remote viewers?
Well, I worked with them, but only as a contract manager. I would travel to the Bay Area quite frequently, not that often, maybe once every 2 months, just to get caught up in some of the work and to overview the line items that we had agreed on mutually and was acceptable to our commander. What we could support, what was reasonable for an Air Force involvement in remote viewing to be about. So we split it out according to basic research and work that would help us understand the phenomena. Is it reliable enough for Air Force applications? And along the latter part, on the part about Air Force, at the same time, I had prepared a document that would hopefully be useful in the event we needed to apply remote viewing in a real operational case. It was something I just felt like doing. And it was on my desk, anytime there's a need to find something like a missing airplane, let me know. And I'll see if I can do something about this through remote viewing. And by this time, through a very fortuitous coincidence, a woman in the organization came to me and said she could do this remote viewing. So even though it was a classified program, she had heard about it within the grapevine. So I checked her out, and she was really outstanding. She was able to describe distant scenes very accurately. So already had now a remote viewer ready to go, so to speak. And then one day I was called into a closed-door meeting, and I was asked whether or not, because the rumor got around that I had a small group of remote viewers, even though it was only one person, and I thought, maybe, you know how rumors are. Now I have a whole group, and we only did this in the evening, and so there was no cost to government time. So anyway, I got called in and said, okay, we have a missing airplane. Do you think you or your people can find it? So, okay, took it on. Why not? I already had developed a protocol. And I went through the drill. I don't want to know anything about it other than what is the airplane you're looking for. I didn't want to know where or anything. And they showed me a picture of the airplane. And it was a Soviet-built airplane. So now we're looking for a Soviet airplane somewhere. So I took this on as a task, with a lot of apprehension. And we went through the protocol with my remote viewer. And after a half an hour or so, she came up with a sketch, and it looked like it was reasonable to work with. It had landmarks and everything that looked like could be found if they were there. So I gave that to the search team, and they said, thank you, we'll get back with you later. Later was a very short time later. I said, hey, let's go again, because we think you're onto something. So we did another session, and what had happened was I was then led into the room to reveal what the search was about, because I wanted to be blind of the details. And here it turned out to be a Soviet airplane. But it was not owned by the Soviets, it was owned by Libya, and the pilot had defected and crashed in the African jungle somewhere. And that's what was the task for the intelligence community, is to locate the airplane and extract all the navigational gear. So, and there was a team in country already trying to do this, but they couldn't find the airplane. And we were the last resort, So I sent the data, because we had a map, and we were able to extract coordinates out of this map that we had overlaid on the search team's map, which was a topographic map of a huge area in Africa. There's only one place that really seemed to fit. We sent in that coordinate that we read off the map. They sent a helicopter over to look in that area, about 80, 90 miles away, out of the expected search area. And they actually found it because a native had already found the airplane and had a piece of aluminum in his hands when they landed the helicopter. Had they not been there in time, they would have had to leave the country. So even though we didn't go right to the airplane spot, we had the helicopter at the right place at the right time, and on rendezvous, so to speak, with the native that had the proof that the airplane was there. And then, of course, the team went into the aircraft and extracted what they needed to and got out of the country as quickly as they could.
And was that in Libya, or where was the country?
It crashed somewhere down in Uganda.
Oh.
I don't really know exactly anymore. The boundary shifted around, but it was quite far south of the Libyan airport that it took off of. And the airplane actually ran out of fuel. And the pilot wanted to defect. He bailed out. And I guess there was still enough fuel for the airplane to continue on another 80 miles. So the eyewitness reports on the ground where the pilot was located were wrong. The airplane didn't crash there; it just kept going. And that's why the search team was in the wrong spot. And they were off by a considerable amount. So had our information not got there the day it did, the team would have had to leave country without the technology they wanted to extract from the airplane.
And did you try remote viewing yourself?
Well, when I initially went to SRI in my role as a contract manager, Hal's protocol for anyone coming in is to sit down and go through a remote viewing protocol so you can experience it, at least feel the protocol, even if you don't get any results. You know what they do, so that you can answer the critic. You know, is there any kind of way the individual could cheat or get advanced information? So we went through all that protocol from a security point of view, but also he asked me, okay, while you're here, you may as well see if you can describe the distance seen that somebody is at. You know, it's what they call at that time the beacon remote viewing protocol. So somebody was out at a site somewhere within the Bay Area, and I relaxed as best as I could. And somehow or another, I had feelings and images and all that, and I put them on, scribbled them out on a piece of paper, Russ target with my monitor, and he was prompting every now and then, describe the target, describe the target. If you ever met Russ, you'll know what I mean. So I did that, and it turned out the sketches were fairly accurate as to what the site was. Now, I didn't really believe, I thought it was by chance I did that, so I insisted on another one the next day. And this turned out to be almost as good, another diverse target. So I finally believed that really most anyone could do this under the right circumstances and the right motivation. And of course, I had a whole rich background of dream recall and working with dreams coming into this. So I think I was already primed. I just hadn't really focused on the particular paradigm called remote viewing. I didn't really think about that methodology until I was sitting on the table with Russ Target sitting around me saying, describe the target. So that was it. And a few times later, I did that, but I kept out of the actual direct involvement. I wanted to make sure I would be as objective as possible when it came to actually reviewing their contract and their own results. I didn't want to get too tangled up in the direct involvement. But although I kept my own involvement with dream work going, and in dream work I had a lot of precognitive material. I was very happy with that. I didn't really need to do remote viewing. So I kind of balanced my connection with the SRI work and with my own independent research, and we had a reasonable coexistence from that time on.
There's a protocol. What is it? What I've read in the past, it's that you just kind of doodle or something. You take a pen and then just see what comes up, or what is the protocol?
Well, the several ways of doing it has evolved over the years, but at that time it was pretty much what you said. You sit down and relax and just sketch or write out whatever impression comes to mind. It may be a weak image, it may be a thought, and you just put it on paper because that records the information. And sometimes it can be an image, although in later versions of remote viewing they discourage that, and they recommend they just go to the response, the automatic response kind of way of doing remote viewing, which is just sketching without and letting your conscious mind out of the way and just sketch. But at that time, early on, because I had a lot of dream recall experience, it was easy for me to actually perceive images. So I just sketched the images that came to mind. was like a daydream kind of. So did it relate to the target or not? I wouldn't know until afterwards, until after you got the feedback, if it did or not. And for me, it was just like a ghostly image. It came into my mind, and I sketched. I also had thoughts about it. So that's how I developed my response. Others were different. Hella Hammett, one of the remote viewers at the time at SRI, would actually see images and just, she was an artist and photographer, and just sketch what she actually perceived as like having a dream that you're recording from memory. So the different styles, different ways of doing it at the time. And there's been evolutions in what is remote viewing and what do you do to achieve the remote viewing state, and what kind of information do you strive to or get to. And of course there's a protocol developed that is quite structured. You go through a certain stage and go through various thought processes or styles. But the main thing is not to let your conscious mind interfere, and you have ways of detracting your thinking as you go through this somewhat automatic response process. And that's a really simplified way of saying it.
That seems to be the main problem in any kind of psi information retrieval, is the analytical left brain overlays. So it's hard to so what procedure was used to keep that analytical mind busy and from interfering?
In the remote viewing style, it would be to write something on one part of the paper, and just kind of write something out and get it out of the conscious mind, and then relax. It's there in the paper. You don't have to deal with it consciously, but it's sort of a step, a symbol, a symbolic act that you go through to detract your thinking. So it takes a little bit of effort to shift around between, here's what I'm going through this structured process, sketching this and these squiggly lines or whatever, but that's really what they look like, these ideograms as they're referred to, which are stepping stones to getting to the basic data. So it's a process, cycling back and forth, writing something out, leaving it go, or having a symbol somewhere on the page that you go back to and maybe put your finger on or something like that to reconnect with the target without consciously thinking about it. So there's a process that you go through that varies, but that's pretty much the idea behind it. Something to detract your thinking. So, and then allow your conscious mind to produce the impulses and the sketches that ultimately become the remote viewing document that you want to submit. So, and sometimes it takes pages and pages to get to a feeling, hey, this is getting close to what I think is there. And you may have lots of really weird looking lines, all kinds of symbols and scratches, as you might call it. But there is a methodology, there is a method to it. And those that work it earnestly say this is a great process and it works for them.
You wrote an interesting article comparing the cave dwellings from the Paleolithic people that are the same kind of similar lines that show up in people's dreams or in these remote viewing doodles. What do you think the connection is?
There might be quite a bit of a connection between these early symbols that you see on cave art, and it could be to reinforce a connection with the subconscious mind, because at certain levels of our perceptual abilities, there are forms and shapes that show up that seem to be fairly consistent over cultures, and it may be that these are stepping stones into our psychic abilities, and it may be like almost like one of the ideograms that people use in remote viewing. It's a way to get into the subconscious area of thinking. So I think there's definitely a connection. I also think that it's also there to reinforce their intent on the hunt. This is the animal I want to catch. Allow me to connect with the soul of that animal. So there's that kind of psychic overlay coming in. And in Native American beliefs, as you probably know, the hunter really does want to make a connection with the soul of the animal before hunting it down. it's a sort of an agreement, okay, I'm here to sacrifice myself for your life, that kind of thing. So there's that psychic connection that's perceived to occur. And these symbols in the cave art, I think, many times enable the hunter, probably a shaman is doing the painting, to proceed then with the ritual and the hunting ceremony and the hunting that follows. Just a viewpoint I have, and I think Graham Hancock, who's written a lot on the subject, goes into some similar ideas on the great cave art and the role of cave art in the I don't want to say the mythology, but in the psychological aspects of the early hunting cultures. So.
The remote viewers were amazingly accurate, and what I'm curious about is why the feds stopped funding them, even though such valuable information was retrieved by the remote viewers.
Yeah, well, at the time, the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, and at that time there's a big push on reducing all these programs that had developed over the years during the Cold War. And our project was always on the edge of being funded or not. And where does it really belong? Could we really? I'm talking about from a funding point of view. Where does it belong? Who should really be doing this? And obviously, we were doing this for the intelligence community, so it should be somewhere in the intelligence world. But when funding cuts came around and people were traveling in the Soviet Union freely, it looks like we really didn't need to have this kind of access. So I would totally agree with that, totally disagree with that. So that was a factor. The other factors, and this is probably the more significant one, the commander that became our commander at the Defense Intelligence Agency at the time, and that was where the remote viewing group resided after it was transferred from an Army group early on. The commander then decided that he didn't want the organization. He did not believe in the phenomenon, no matter what results we had. And in fact, I doubt if he ever even looked at any of our reports. He just automatic no, and didn't want it. It was an embarrassing thing to him. He didn't believe in the phenomenon, and early on he tried to get rid of it. Didn't succeed, and this time he was the commander, and that was a precipitating factor. I'm sure there are other factors you can find when you can dig around, but in my view, that was the biggest one. We had a commander that just simply did not want to have that. And ultimately he found a way to phase us out of it. So that's it. It ended.
To move into your dream work, which you've continued for the rest of your life, you said that it's possible to have precognition or prophecy if you access your dreams. Could you explain how that works?
Yes, and when you start entering and being open to dreams and dream recall, it doesn't take very long, without any intention whatsoever, but just the intention to recall dreams. It doesn't take very long before you have a dream and say, now how could I know that? Where did that information come from? And then it turns out to be true. And I think that the very second dream that I ever recorded in my now new official dream journal, which began in 1970, after a traumatic experience in the Canadian River. That's another story. But anyway, I started the dream journal. Second dream. It was very clear. It had to do with a certain individual in the building where I worked at the time, the Foreign Technology Division, and what would be happening to him, where he would end up, in what particular hospital and what ward. And 5 days later, there he was. So it happened exactly as I saw in the dream. So how did that happen? I didn't even intend for it to happen. But the fact that I was curious about the future, because that was my job, to anticipate future activity in the Soviet Union, and it carried over into my daily life. I was always conscious about or thinking about what's around the corner, what's next. And since I was quite active during the summer, sometimes for 3 weeks at a time, in wilderness travel in the Arctic and other areas of Canada, I was always concerned about what's around the corner, from a safety point of view. So this concern probably is what got me going into the precognitive dream world. Now, since that time, and working with many people over the years in my workshops and in the conversations I have, and other instructional modes, I find that anyone can dream of the future if they really focus on wanting to know anything at all about the incidents that they may encounter in the next day or the next week. So it's just a matter of intending and desiring to have that information be presented. And in time, we will have that. I think it's a natural tendency for us to have those dreams anyway, but we don't remember them. So there, but we just don't. Most people don't pull out or forget about them if they do have a faint recollection of them. So it's not an issue so much of some unusual protocol, other than setting down a desire to work with your dreams. Keep records, keep a good journal. A record-keeping sends a signal to your subconscious mind that you're interested in this stuff. And that interest alone will trigger it. And they don't have to be anything spectacular when you do have them. They can be very trivial. And most of precognitive dreams, I think, go by unnoticed. That's why people say, I don't have them, because they're so minor. But yet it could qualify, if you really analyze the background, could qualify as a precognitive dream. So it's there. It's a matter of uncovering. And in fact, I'll be doing a workshop locally in a couple of weeks, and that'll be my title, Uncovering Your Precognitive Abilities. So it's just uncovering, and then the rest of it is keeping track of what you recall and comparing it to the truth of the situation as it unfolds, and going on from there. But there's nothing particularly startling that needs to be done other than that.
What I found when I kept a dream journal is this key. The key was when I woke up, not to get out of bed and go to the bathroom, but to say, what did I dream? And imagine kind of like a video screen, and then the dream images would roll. And then I'd remember 1, 2, 3 dreams if I did that. But if I got out of bed, then they were too fleeting and I lost them.
Yeah, right. That's one of the key things. Don't move. If you want to remember the dream and you have trouble doing that, and you recall something right when you woke up, don't move. Just hold your body motionless, and then let it come, like you said, come into your mind. And if you study any of the Native American lore and the dream catcher and the activities around remembering dreams from their point of view, that's one of their main things. Don't move. Just wait and let the dream unfold, and then get up and do your stuff.
Well, write it down. I mean, write it down while you're in bed, so you have your dream journal by your bed.
Yeah. Some people are good to remember everything even later on when they do get up. But it is best to jot down a few notes. You don't have to write the whole thing out. A few notes will jog the memory, and everything will come back. Most everything. Sure, there'll be a loss of detail, but most of the time, jotting a few notes will do the trick. And you get up in the morning, you look at that. Many times I'll look at my dream journal, and I can already read what I wrote. But when I read it, I say, my goodness, that's right, I did have that. Then the whole thing will come back. So it's looking at a few words, and it's like an icon. It just in your computer, it just calls up that whole data stream. It's amazing.
What I found is it would take maybe 2 or 3 months before I would understand the meaning of repeated symbols. And they were symbols unique to my unconscious, but they had to repeat before I got what they were telling me about what was going on in my psyche.
Yeah. Well, many times when you first enter the dream world and recording dreams, remembering and recalling them, there will be a lot of symbolic material. So that will require some effort to keep track of and see where that's going. But and a lot of that has to do with the personal issues and other activities that dreams are noted for. And many times the symbols are purposely guarded so that if there is something there that we need to know, it doesn't hit us all at one time. We have to figure it out in kind of a logical way. But for precognitive dreams, I have found that there's very little symbolism involved. They're usually quite literal, right to the point, and very brief. So you don't have to go through a very long dream dictionary. And I don't like dream dictionaries. Each one has a personal meaning.
Yeah.
You create your own sense to it. But your own dream dictionary is pretty much literal by the time you start rolling into precognitive dreams. So, again, the precognitive part of dreaming usually only shows up if you really are wanting to do this. Unless there's some real threat that's coming your way. Then, hey, you better learn about this pretty soon. Maybe it's an accident or some situation. The people at 9/11 had quite a few of these, as far as I could tell, after talking to some of the people involved, the spouses that survived, of the survivors. So there's critical information that's going to be there anyway. But by and large, the information is there to review and access and decide whether or not this is something you need to take action on, to avoid, to try to prevent, or at the most, it's to have you be better prepared for a situation that you have no control on. And that, to me, occurs very often, that people have this dream and think about it, and they say, oh, that could mean this, and sure enough, that incident happens, but they're better prepared, even though they couldn't do anything about it. Mm. So I see that as a worthwhile attribute of precognitive dreaming. A lot of people don't say, well, why should I even want to know that? I said, I'd rather know it than not know it.
Oh, yeah. Well, what I've read is the most common dreams are anxiety dreams, then wish fulfillment dreams, then maybe working out unconscious growth issues or something. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yes, that happens when you first get into this. If you haven't been working with dreams, there will be quite a bit of dream material that has to do with your own inner dynamics, issues that you haven't totally faced, relationship issues. Or if you're a creative person, you may have been suppressing some creative potential within you. So I have artist friends that have extremely vivid dreams that they actually end up painting, and the picture they paint of the dream is really quite outstanding. So it was as if there's dreaming mind is waiting for the opportunity to say, hey, shift over and reclaim that talent that you pushed aside after you left high school or something like that, and get back to your creative side. Musicians tell me the same thing. Or writers. I think it's Robert Louis Stevenson would actually have the whole scenario in his dreams about his dream characters, dream drawings, I think he called it. Then they would kind of act out the scenarios and get up and write it out. So, but these are creative people, and if you're not satisfying that creative urge, the dreams will only force you into it. And take a look. What are you skipping on your life? And get back to your creativity. So that happens a lot when you get into dreams. You discover urges, tendencies that you had buried. And of course, sometimes you pick up information that is really helpful just to get through the difficult times in your life. I worked with people many years ago that had traumatic situations occur during their childhood. And those trauma situations were resurfaced in their dream after they were old enough and mature enough to handle it. But it was kind of like a healing thing. They were able to resolve what happened to them back then. Not pleasant, but they were able to resolve it and move on with their life because it had been holding them back in their relationships with others. So that's the kind of thing that can happen when you really start working with dreams.
When there are precognitive dreams, what does that tell us about consciousness or time that we can receive information from the future? And in terms of like quantum physics, is there any explanation for why we can do that?
Right now, there are hints in quantum physics that say, certainly there are things that are beyond the space-time reality. Particles seem to pop in and out of reality. They wave in and out. I think it's some of the terms I've seen recently. Or you're probably familiar with the idea of the non-local phenomena where particles link together now and then separated, and they can remain that connection no matter where they are, how fast the connection is. It could be instantaneous. It would be instantaneous. So there's that connection, and there's hints in quantum physics that say, hey, we don't really understand this reality that well. Things are moving in and out of it. So when it comes to things of the mind, and the mind, of course, has material that probably has quantum characteristics. We just don't quite know how to get to that level yet, although some researchers think they have ideas on that. So that I think through our already natural mental processes, we can link at some quantum physics level, whatever that might mean. It's a level that's outside of space-time. So once you're outside of space-time, I mean, what are the ground rules? It could be anything. And the thing, no matter how impossible, and quantum physics looks quite impossible when you think about non-locality. But when you talk about the future, it's a little different. Maybe it's a huge difference here. But I look at it more from the point of view of information from the future. And I'm not quite sure if that's the same kind of thing that the quantum physicists are looking at when they're talking about things going in and out of this reality. Now, where is that information? Well, I'm beginning to think that there really is something like a cosmic, I'm going to use a rough term here, I don't really know what it means, but something like a cosmic hologram, something that has all this information there. I think early on, I don't know if you ever studied Edgar Cayce, but he talks about the Akashic records. So the idea of library in the sky, there's something that holds information that's beyond what we can possibly conceive of. It's not in this reality. Another way of saying it, our fundamental mind, an aspect of our mind, is not in this reality. It just isn't. Our brain is, but not the part of our mind that's not part of our brain. It's outside of this reality. So once you're outside of this reality, then what are the ground rules? And it looks to me like once you're there is a facility in this outer region of the mind for accessing things that can be predicted in the future. And that's, I think, where precognition comes in. This huge reservoir of knowledge, this cosmic mind hologram, has the ability to project and predict ahead in time. And then this is the part that we're picking up in our precognitive experiences. Of course, some people will argue that, well, there is no future, there is no past, it's all now. Everything is instantaneous, it's right now. Well, there still has to be some discrimination, some way of knowing what is potentially in the future, even though it's known now. It can be currently accessed, that potential. But it's still a potential. It's not a real existence in the sense that we call real. It's one of the many probabilities that are out there that are coming our way. And which one is the one that will be real? It's the one that happens right now. So there it is now. But thousands of others out there too. So we pick up one that might be the most likely, and it happens. But sometimes the most likely fades at the time we do the perception, and then it's not that. So we're wrong. So it wasn't that precognition didn't work. It's that we had just picked out the one that wasn't quite as probable as one that snuck in on its track toward our rendezvous with us at this time.
You may know Larry Burke's work about dreams with cancer patients, breast cancer patients.
Yes, I'm quite familiar with Larry. I've had many good conversations with him at conferences and down at the Ryan Research Center. Yes, I know Larry's work. Yes.
So it would be great if physicians would take those dreams seriously. I mean, it could be a useful diagnostic tool.
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with that. And in fact, I have colleagues, well, actually friends in Toronto, Canada, that actually employ sensitives that are very good at dream work with diagnostics of people that come to the clinic. And they have a really good track record there. And what they perceive, and then the medical person that's really the official one that is the go-between will then have the option of following up or not, depending upon what's going on, and then check it out and find that sure enough this is probably a valid diagnosis. Let's go with that, and then verify it or not. So there are people that work with doctors, and I'm aware of Larry's work, and there are other people that have these experiences and have written books about them. And a friend of mine from Boulder, Colorado, had a recurring dream of being stabbed in the neck repeatedly with a sharp needle, and ignored it. We went to a doctor finally. The doctor couldn't find anything wrong. The dream kept repeating. And finally, the medical profession, the place that we actually discovered cancer beginning. So they were able to get ahead of that cancer. So it was a precognitive alert to an emerging situation that at that time could not be diagnosed even. It had developed to a certain stage, but it was still caught in time. So yeah, there are individually people can have these, and then hopefully act on the information. Or people like Larry working with the group of people that he has, or my colleagues up in Toronto, they have they're in a good position to explore this, and hopefully more individuals in the medical community will start paying attention. And I'm not saying this is going to be the absolute way to go, but if at last resort, what do you have to lose really, as long as it's handled properly, and no careless actions are taken. But if it's something the doctor hasn't thought about, well, that might be it. Take a look. Work as a team.
In Toronto, do the sensitives, are they medical intuitives, or do they somehow work with dreams?
No, well, you would call them a medical intuitive, but the one I'm thinking about right now, it relies more on dream work. And I don't really separate a lot of difference between dream intuition and ordinary intuition, because ultimately intuition is in the subconscious mind. It could surface consciously or it could surface in a dream. So either way, you get intuitive information presented, either awake or asleep. So that's what I look at it.
Do those sensitives interpret the dreams of the patients, or do they dream for the patients?
The ones I'm thinking about are the ones that dream for the patient. And again, this is all an agreement. It's cleared with the doctor, it's cleared with the patient. So they then are brought in to seek additional guidance, if that's what you want to call it, through dream work. Now, I'm not saying they don't do other kinds of intuitions, because how can you really separate an ability to really do dream diagnostics without also having the hunches and the feelings while you're awake that might give you a clue to what's going on with the client. And so it's a variable way of doing it, awake or asleep. She just happens to like to work with dreams. Other people have done the more conscious awake approach to sensing what might be going on in the other individual's physical condition. I'm an advocate of having the individual dream themselves, be their own person to diagnose, but many times it's not too practical, because the individual is either too resentful or too resistant, I should say, to this happening, or too fearful of what the dream might reveal.
You may also know James Reed's work, where a group will dream for a person who has an issue, and the whole group will dream and report back on their dreams the next day to help them.
Yeah, years ago I actually worked with I think it was Henry Reed at the time.
Henry, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure.
Henry.
Different Reed, yeah. And I had been involved in some of his dream helper ceremonies. And of course, I've done some of my own dream helper ceremonies when I do my dream workshops. And it really does, people are curious, really skeptical, but by the time we're through with the exercise, they have come around, because there's some really interesting, accurate material comes out of the other people about the person to be dreamt for. That's quite helpful. I get lots of stories on that one. So yes, I'm quite aware of that, and it's I think a good approach, and I intend to reactivate that approach in my next workshop. I haven't done any of that for a couple of years, but I'm going to get back on track on that, because I've been sensing quite a bit of interest in dreams in my local area community, which I hadn't sensed before. People are raising questions quite frequently when I bump into them. So I'm going to do a few of those coming up in the next few months locally.
You've written tracks in the psychic wilderness and river dreams, and they're mostly about dreams. Is that right?
Well, the first book is a mixture of remote viewing, synchronicity, and dreams. And the second book is actually about some practical issues we encountered in the Stargate programs, the real operational tasks, which would be remote viewing. But there is an underlying dream theme, but it's not the only thing those books are written about. And in fact, in the first book, I have recommended approaches for remote viewing, for synchronicity, and for dreams as an appendix. For people who want to look at either one of those three modes of what I call psych-perception, because not everyone likes remote viewing, not everybody likes dreams, so take your pick. But whatever you do, don't forget synchronicity, because then you don't have to do anything but just simply hope or anticipate that interesting things will happen. It's really, I think, a form of precognition that we don't remember. A psychologist would argue, of course, saying, well, it's like deja vu, and you just had the memory, and then a second later you forgot you had that memory. Oh, no, not at all. It's not like that, because in synchronicity, the experiences are just too incredibly startling to say that was a faulty memory. And I hope someday that psychologists will change their definition or their viewpoint on deja vu, because I think that's connected with synchronicity. It's connected with the precognition. It's connected with all of psi and intuition. So,
what's an example of a synchronicitous experience that you've had that was kind of mind-blowing?
I had quite a few. I think the one that's first in my mind, because I just happened to be collecting some background on it for a relative. Some 10 years ago, I wanted to find the roots to on my mother's side of the family in Wales. In 1848, a relative, whatever that relative was, distant great-great-great-grandfather, left Wales for the U.S. And in 1898 was the last contact, so we had almost 100 years of no contact with that side of the family. I had no idea where they were. I had one letter, but it didn't really have much address information on it, just a little name on the top that we couldn't locate anywhere in the maps. So I happened to be in London on a business trip. My wife came over and joined me, and we said, this is the week we're going to find the long-lost relative. Okay? This is it. Do or die. 100 years is enough. So we set out somewhere in Wales, but where in Wales? And you kept looking and searching. The name Roberts doesn't help you end, because there's a zillion Roberts in Wales. So we finally, after going through all the courthouse records, ended up in one small courthouse on the Isle of Anglesey. And this is the last shot, So we're going through the microfiche. And in Wales, you have to, the records can only be released to foreigners after 100 years. That's a law. So anything I'm looking at is 100 years old. But that's fine, because my relative left the country in 1848. So we're looking, we can't find any records, anything that links with the names. So we're ready to give up. It's the last day we're going to be in Wales, basically, and we're so discouraged. I can't find them. So the clerk, seeing our distress, said, oh, by the way, we have one more box that was just released for foreigners that's 100 or more years old. See if there's anything in here. We went through there, and there were the names.
Great.
The names of my distant relatives. So, okay, now what? Now we know there's this spot of the Isle of Anglesey, but where? So she looked at the names and said, oh, as a child, I remember being on a hill with a place that had a name like that, and gave me the directions. So I went there, and we're driving around, and here's this old stone cottage, and just stones on a pile. So at the end of the road. So I said to my wife, well, maybe that was the old cottage that was written about in the letter, the old Pennyworth cottage. So I'm taking photos. The woman comes out of the house next to it, a new house, and says, what are you looking for? And I said, well, I'm looking for my roots, tongue robbers. And she said, well, come in and meet your uncle. That was him. That was the place.
Wow.
But look at the timing. 100 years, the last box, the clerk had to know the name of that house and where it was located. Because in Wales, you don't have house numbers at that time, or even now. It's just the name of her house. That was a tough one, and we found. I call that synchronicity.
That's great. Let's see. You mentioned sometimes in your workshops you talk about UFO experiences. What do you know? What do you think about UFOs and aliens, extraterrestrials?
Okay, this comes up a lot, and my view is kind of neutral, mainly about what the experience is. Partly because, first of all, I can accept it as a real experience. The question is, what is the significance? How would you perceive it? What does it mean? What is the reality behind the experience? Now, since I have a lot of experience in lucid dreaming, I'm inclined to see a number of the reports that I look at as possibly a lucid dream type of experience, not a literal thing that the person was actually there and perceived an individual that they said was an alien. It could have been a symbol, something from the subconscious and unknown aspect of the individual. So I tend to look at many of the experiences as symbolic. Similar to some lucid dreams, but I can't totally say that the content is only of an individual's subconscious mind. Now maybe there really is an overlay from some other intelligence that entered into the scene, so to speak, and that is a form of contact or communication. So I'm open to how to interpret this. I don't particularly see them as literal. But where do you draw the line between only a dream, a part lucid dream, and a part communication with something beyond our own ordinary consciousness, or maybe some extraterrestrial source? So I don't know. I'm open, but I don't pass judgment on how the person sees and interprets the experience. I may have my own views, but that's just my personal views because I have not actually had a UFO type experience as people describe, other than perceiving mandala or disc type shapes in dreams. But then I tended to realized that when I had those dreams, they were more symbolic of something like a Kundalini experience, a link to some of the Hindu concepts, or of what is consciousness, how do you achieve higher consciousness. And Gopal Krishna wrote that book, Higher Consciousness, years ago, that I found very useful because it helped explain some of my own dreamlike experiences of mandalas and cobras, which came into some of my dreams, which normally would be frightening to most people. But I saw the cobra that showed up in one of my dreams as a symbol of something. At the time, I didn't realize it was a direct connection to some of the concepts from the Hindu tradition and that culture, and Kundalini as defined by Gopal Krishna is the opening up of chakras and becoming more aware of your total psychic nature, and something like that I guess happened to me, although coming in from the dream side, it was not near as ferocious as the kinds of things, or as energetic, I should say, as the kind of experiences that many people have when these experiences occur spontaneously. And they can be really hard to deal with. And there really are helping groups out there, spiritual crisis groups, I think they're called. I haven't been in contact with those for a long time, but I think there are groups that are available to discuss these kinds of energetic experiences when they occur. And these are really powerful experiences, like being electrocuted, being shocked, and shaken all over. So it's the kind of thing that you read about in the shamanic literature as well. But you also find it in the Eastern traditions a lot too, under the Kundalini Yoga label, and I find that a very useful literature for some of the things I experienced, and also useful for when I came across people in my workshops that had this kind of experience that didn't know what to do with them. So I was able to provide some kind of guidance.
Yeah. So, I guess for some people, the rising the Kundalini from the base of the spine up to the crown chakra feels like mental illness. I mean, it's really very disturbing rather than blissful or an enlightenment experience.
And in fact, in the Bay Area, I think Lisa Nally was an author that wrote one of the first good books on the Kundalini experiences, where you try to look at it from the medical point of view and also from a real physiological situation that is ongoing, that we just really, or that happens, that we just haven't been able to quantify through instrumentation. So there are doctors, medical people that acknowledge this effect, and they're not saying it's just a psychosis. They're saying this is some kind of transition, some kind of energetic thing, activity that enters into people's bodies, minds, and in fact, certain situations prompt this kind of experience without any metaphysical or other cosmological concepts. The Icelandic fever, for example, is known in the literature. People that are isolated a long time in darkness. Sometimes these experiences erupt spontaneously, and they look very much like a Kundalini event. So there's something in the physiology that is real, and for people that have them and see it as a consciousness awakening thing, like you do in the Asian traditions, that I think is really a valuable insight to have, and to study those practices for controlling the energy and also for understanding where it might be going.
In lucid dreaming, if you don't do it naturally, is there a technique that you teach so that people can have more control when they're dreaming?
Well, yeah, I'm getting an echo. What happened? I got an echo. Just a minute. There's an echo in here. I'll put this aside. Does that sound better?
Yeah. It was fine.
I had an echo. Okay. Yeah, in lucid dreaming, there's several ways to actually experience or to have a lucid dream. You can decide and go through a mental exercise to wake up while you're dreaming when you see a certain symbol. The one commonly used is whenever I have a hand show up in my dream, that's the sign to me that, hey, I'm lucid dreaming. Now I can become aware of being in the dream. And this seems to work. I don't know why a hand would do it. It could be some other object, but that's what's been used. Another method is simply to lie motionless in bed and imagine that you are becoming more relaxed and deeper and falling deeper into the sleep-like state, and then desiring to become lucid or to become aware of whatever the next stage of your perceptions will be. If it's a dream, then you become lucid. This can also lead to the experience that people call as an out-of-body experience, which has a correlation, I think, to lucid dreaming, only it's more literal and more exact in terms of its content than the lucid dream world, which can really flit around. So the methods that I found useful for me, and in fact, it was kind of accidental. I actually began lucid dreaming when I was quite young. I was really curious about what happened when we fell asleep. And I just decided one night as a kid just to lay in bed and trick myself and say, I'm not going to fall asleep. I just want to see where I'm going what's going to happen when I fall asleep. It's a kind of an odd thought. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but that was what my kid mind thought. And in time, it didn't take too long. I could lay in bed and decide to keep hold of consciousness and then become aware of a dream right away. In other words, go from the conscious awake directly into the lucid dream state. And that is a technique that I found out decades later is part of the approach used by the dream yoga tradition from Tibet. So just what I said, they just hold on to consciousness as you feel like you're going to sleep, and you will end up in a dreamlike situation, aware of being in a dream. So that technique follows the dream yoga tradition. And then there's probably some variations to what I said, but it's more or less a focusing on intending to recall a dream while you're dreaming is a more common way. It's sort of saying, tonight I know I'm going to dream, but when I'm dreaming, I want to remember that I'm dreaming. So it becomes a different kind of dream focus, more than just remembering the dream afterwards, but remember the dream during the dream. So that's pretty much a summary. There's other ways of doing this that some of my colleagues have written up quite well and expressed in recent publications. Robert Wagner from the Dream Groups, the International Association for the Study of Dreams, has written some really good material on how to achieve lucidity in a dream.
It seems to me that the new paradigm that's being developed by people like you is idealistic rather than materialistic, emphasizes consciousness over everything is just what the brain, how it perceives. So do you think that there is in fact a new paradigm being created that is non-materialist for science?
I think it's happening, yes. In fact, there's an organization, the Society for Scientific Exploration, SSE, is having a meeting in Denver this June. I'll be giving a paper there, and their focus is on the new scientific paradigm. So they are forefronters to this movement, if that's what it is that you mentioned. And I think it's happening. It's gradual, but I think it's a matter of being overtaken by events. The resistors, the people that really resist, the really critics that are what I call irrational critics, they're be slowly fading away into the background because they see that they can't. What they're resisting is not being rejected by most people. People are interested in this topic, so that there's a gradual overtaking by events. The zeitgeist, as the old term in psychology would have it. So that's happening. Now, it's I think more than just simply an awareness that there is a phenomena that's real and that reasonable people are writing about it and experimenting with it and having experiences. But that anybody can have this and they're finding out for themselves that they have these experiences. So that's happening at the grassroots level, so to speak. But I think what's also helping on this new paradigm that's emerging, which would be combining consciousness and a materialistic way of looking at things into one unity. It's more than just an either or, it's both, like the duality of light, a particular way. But also, I think the general population, the world even, is becoming more accustomed to unity, thinking, unlike as it might seem at the time, at this time in our history. But think of the internet. If people are becoming psychologically adjusted to instant communication worldwide, and if you go back 10, 20 years, this feeling of global connectedness, it didn't exist, really. It was a global disharmony. Of course, now it's still that, but not quite as severe. So I think the internet, the fact that it exists, is a way of saying, hey, if the internet is this fast, instantaneous, I can't get my finger off the keyboard before I have the answer from Google. How fast is that? Where's the information? This is a mystery, and so is to most people, and it's to me too. But it loosens, it restricts, it loosens the resistance to the idea of consciousness having this interconnected feature that encompasses everyone, you and I, animals, all sentient beings. So there's something there in this internet mentality, even though we may not like some of the things that happens through the internet, but this concept, this global connectivity, I think is what's leading to an easier way for others, and scientists in particular, who have been resisting side, and anything having to do with consciousness beyond a mere phenomena of the brain, anything that's resisting that, I think, is just slipping by the wayside, making room for whatever this new paradigm might be. And if it only leads to an acceptance of this unity of connection, then consciousness is basically everywhere, not just in our brain or minds everywhere, or there's a global mind, wherever that is. So I think that's happening, and science is going to have to adjust. What are you going to do with this? Are they new theories, or do we just say, okay, that's the way it is, and move on with new definitions that encompasses? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what comes out at the conference this June with the SSE at Boulder, because I know they're striving to bring more thought, creative thought to this whole issue, and hopefully there will be an approach that will be helpful for all of us.
You talk about this revolution in consciousness started with young people in the 1960s who integrated East and West, inner exploration and the human potential movement. So it sounds like you would add that as well as the internet to the influences on this new paradigm.
Oh, absolutely. I think that triggered a lot of changes in society, and being openness to the Eastern religions, or the Eastern philosophies, depending how you look at it. Being open to that concept of consciousness as an ever-reaching aspect of our abilities and our being. I think that it was a really big contribution from that time frame, and it's carried over. So, and I think we're seeing that. Of course, we're seeing that right now in all the literature and the language that's developing. Even some of the physicists use similar concepts in language. David Bohm, for example, with the explicate order ideas of the universe and reality moving in and out of existence. And so the physicists picked up on that, but gave names that they thought would be more fitting for a physics or scientific kind of view, but that had its roots in those movements back there. And it continued, and probably will become even more prominent as more people look at East-West traditions, and I think that's happening too. It was not just a one-time event. It's a sort of a gradual increase from what I can perceive when I go to bookstores and talk to people. What I see in media productions. So I think it's happening.
Is it fair to say that consciousness equals mind, or how do you define consciousness?
Yeah, it's a slippery word, I think. Most people will think, well, when I'm awake and not asleep, that I'm conscious. The way consciousness has been used is to be all-encompassing, including the unconscious. So whatever the combination of awake consciousness and subconscious and unconscious experiences are, I would tend to see that's consciousness, because at some level we're conscious, even though it's delayed, or we won't know about it until we remember a dream or something like that. So I think consciousness as being used refers to more like a field, more like something that we're within, the mind field, or whatever the mind is. It's a concept that implies the totality of psychic being, of mental abilities, the totality of it all.
An information field.
Yeah, there might be better words that will evolve, but that's kind of the way I understand it right now. And I may even be off track in my comprehension, but that's kind of the way I understand consciousness to mean in the moment. It could be a different word maybe developed later on, but that's where we are right now. Consciousness.
You talk about there's methods to evaluate psi experiences and the issue of confluences. Could you discuss that?
Well, the methods of evaluating any experience, particularly those that are with what the phenomena we're talking about, it's a matter of just simply making sure you have the record, record what the experience is, and then when you do learn ground truth, make a really close comparison, what was correct and what was not correct, and learn from the mistakes. And now in the early remote viewing days, we relied heavily on sketching, and that was about the only thing we would look at. How well does the sketch correlate with the intended physical appearance of the area that we were hoping to describe. So it was a fairly straightforward thing. Now, that's on a one-to-one correspondence thing. Now, in a scientific approach, you want to get statistics, so you have to run a lot of these experiences and then do a comparative method, which could be looking at your data or somebody's data and then comparing it to a dummy target, one that wasn't up at the time, just pulled randomly out of the file, and then see what the differences are and develop a statistic on a binary basis, how many would have correlated, how many did not. And there are other methods. So there are methods of how you can evaluate the data. Scientifically, you need to have a nice database in order to get statistical strength. For an individual, you're not going to be doing experiments. You're going to be having live one-to-one incidents that are not that coherent from one to the other. They're quite diverse. You're not going to be able to do that kind of analysis. So you want to just look and compare each event, and on a case-by-case basis. How good was it? Where did you go wrong? Where did the interpretations go awry? And interpreting the data can be tricky. Not everything is that easy to understand when you have the perception. So there's a learning process. How do you interpret the material? You might be able to see an object or a place at a long distance, but you may not be able to fully understand what the significance is. So you have to work around the meaning and what I call the form-meaning issue. What is the appearance, the sensory aspect, and what is the interpretive aspect? Now, at a personal level, for individuals that have personal dreams, this is usually fairly not too difficult because personal dreams are really aimed right at the individual. So any background is going to be recognizable. Any individual in a personal precognitive dream is that person. There's no need to fiddle around. So this is the issue. But if you're doing experiments, you may not be able to make that kind of comparison. The human brain has a special networks that are really good for face recognition. So people's faces are really good ways to see and to how well you did on experiments with people. The ones that are going to be really right on. Strangers might not be quite as accurately defined. But so it's what is the purpose of the experience? So it can be very easy to evaluate, or it can be, if you're doing experiments, it can be a complex procedure. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, got it. I wanted to ask a few questions about you. What do you do for fun?
Hey, listen, my fun is actually not too many people's fun. I really enjoy canoeing in the wilderness. And I go out of my way to go there. Not so much in recent years since we moved around, but I started having you might say, a love affair with the wilderness as a kid. And some of the books I read were so inspiring. I said, I got to go into the North Woods. I got to retreat the path of the voyageurs. I just had that in me. So my fun is to actually do that. And I wasn't able to really get going until I had accumulated enough time to take off from my work. A couple of weeks here and there. And so some of the canoe trips that I took in Canada are 400 miles long or more. So it takes at least 3 weeks to do that. So that's my idea of fun, to go into the wilderness and go as far north as I can. And I've gone through the big rivers that go into the Arctic Ocean. I've trekked around in the tundra. So that's my idea of fun. And if I'm not in a canoe in Canada, then I'm in the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, or the Appalachian Trail, which is right within a stone's throw of where I live here in eastern Pennsylvania. And weather permitting, this is really bad. I'm up on that trail. And there's a parking lot that's 1,000 feet below the top, and I go right up to that and come right down as fast as I can. Then if I don't want to race, then I go to the trail and hike a couple miles at a slow pace. That's my idea of fun. Now, sometimes I shift and I go down to in Reading, Pennsylvania, not far from here, and join the Duplicate Bridge Club and have a good game of Duplicate Bridge. Those are my ideas of fun.
Okay. Also, I think it would be interesting for readers to know when the most difficult times were in your life and how you coped as a bright, interesting person.
Well, my most difficult times were physical as a child. And I coped really by just somehow developing a survivor instinct. It was in me from the beginning, I think. I had to survive to get out of this. And I found in elementary school that we didn't have too much reading material. I had mentioned earlier the Explorer books. But there was also books on poetry. And there were some poems in there that were so inspiring. I would recite these poems whenever I really felt I was struggling either in the farm area or in the wilderness, or even with my physical condition, because I would tend to get sick easy as a child. So poetry and just being in nature was really, really how I overcame those difficulties. Those were physical. And the psychological ones, when I finally realized that these dreams I had were not commonly understood or even wanted to be understood by parents and others, I just simply kept them to myself. Now later on, when it became more visible in my interest, then I had to develop strategies for how do I deal with difficult situations with friends, relatives, and people in the workplace when these topics come up, if they're going to come up at all. Ultimately, they had to come up in some places when I became involved with the remote viewing work. So when that came up, I just simply had to develop a strategy of saying, well, I don't really know, I don't understand this stuff, which is true, but I never developed a persona that said, hey, look what I can do, or why don't you guys believe this? I never went that route. I said, this is really interesting stuff. I don't understand it, but maybe you can help me out. Where am I going wrong? That kind of thing. So really laid back, but not overly apologetic, but just saying, this is strange stuff. I don't quite know what it means, but other people have it too. And maybe you know of somebody, and normally they do. But I found that I could bring people out I could bring people into a dialogue, and that's what I really couldn't do. The worst times I had were with the statisticians that I dealt with. They just felt that whatever we did was ultimately explainable. It's the law of many averages. I've forgotten the name of it. But you wait long enough, it's going to happen. That just doesn't fly. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not probable.
Yeah, so I had to develop a strategy to overcome these relationship difficulties that was flexible, but not to the point of being overbearing. And if the dialogue that I was hoping for didn't look like it was going to materialize, I just went on to some other topic. But ultimately, I would relate it to a natural phenomenon, the wilderness. This is the kind of experience that people had millions of years ago, maybe, or talk about Native American lore, or the Aborigines of Australia in the Dreamtime, or even in my backyard here, the Iroquois and the Lapi tribes and some of their dream ceremonies and all that, and how Native Americans, and of course also the Inuit that I talked to later on in my Arctic travels, how they would rely on intuitions and dreams for finding the food source. It's survival issues. So when you put it in that context, and the fact that whatever this was, their intuition, however you define it, it got them out of trouble or led them into places where they actually could find sustenance. It has a practical ring to it, and it is practical.
Yeah.
And so survival is kind of where I end up as a baseline, And hey, listen, this goes way back as part of survival, and in fact, I really believe it's part of evolution. And one of these days, I'm hoping to see the evolutionist theories develop to augment and say, hey, this is more than random selection going on, and I want to get away from controversy that was generated by the intelligent design people, and going to the opposite direction and saying that it's not evolution at all. It is some kind of divine intervention. So I'm saying, well, somewhere in between is where evolution is. The need is perceived by some animal, some organism, and that perception is a feedback into what happens to the organism or the animal. Either you get you stretch your neck longer, or you, like a giraffe, or you get a new kind of camouflage real quick to adjust to the changing of the climate. So it's putting in that context of reactions and interactions and reactions at a natural level for evolution, I think, is a way ultimately that evolutionist theories might then expand to include the role of mental intention, which is more than just simply a desire to, but it also links in with psi, the ability to perceive what you really need to know about to survive.
Right.
Not just around the corner, but the next decade.
Right. I agree. What about family? Have you had the same wife all these years?
No, that's a good question. And in fact, I have. really supportive. And now she's from a medical background. And initially was very skeptical because she's quite a logical person, and I'm not exactly the most logical one. No, we've had discussions on the topic, but I've never had any issues whatsoever with her on this topic. And she's seen the benefits, definitely. And in fact, one instance was actually life-saving, and that did it.
What do you mean? What was the instance?
Well, it was an issue that happened, a traumatic situation that happened in the surf of Hawaii. We were there for almost 2 years during the Vietnam period when I was still with the Air Force. I was doing systems analysis work and air defense analysis work at the time during the Vietnam crisis. It was just a temporary assignment, but we took many opportunities to go to the shore. And one time she got swept out by a riptide, and I had no idea whatsoever that she was in the water. And I just happened to be at another spot of the beach and just felt this powerful urge to go in another direction when I should have been going in to shore. The red flag was up, but I didn't notice it. I couldn't see it because at that time I did not have my diving goggles on with the corrective lens, and my vision without those lenses was 2600 almost legally blind. So I couldn't see anything, I couldn't hear anything, but I kept being pulled toward a certain position toward the open ocean, and I kept going, and there she was, going out. She can't swim, so I was able to bring her back.
She can't swim?
No, she hadn't gone into the water to swim. She just was waiting when the riptide caught her, a big wave. Did you ever hear of having your face planted in Hawaii? That's when you turn your back to the ocean, and the wave comes up and goes whack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
wow.
this place is big.
And then, did you have children?
Yeah, we have two, and one lives in Hong Kong, the other one in Florida, and they understand, and they know what their dad's into, and we have fun talking about that. In fact, I get a call every now and then from my son in Hong Kong. He says, "Hey, I was trying to get a television program out here to relax, and I turned around and here's your mug on it." That was part of a Discovery Channel program on paranormal. I just happened to be on, and he saw it out there. So we have a lot of fun with it. So they're quite accepting of it.
The last question is, in the face of climate change and increasing numbers of autocrats, growing world inequality, are you an optimist or a pessimist about our survival as a species?
Well, those are good issues, and we're confronted with them every day in the news. But I tend to be an optimistic person, so maybe I'm biased. And of course, I will definitely say there's going to be cycles of bad times and not so bad, and recovery times, and shifting around in different countries of political leaders, whatever. You're going to have this chaos, basically, and not just natural stuff. That's going to be happening anyway. But I just feel that sure, there are going to be these things happening, but I just feel confident somehow that at deeper levels of our human psyche, and hopefully I'm speaking for all of us, kind of, even though they may not realize it, that there's subconscious things happening, some stream of consciousness that's interacting that will help right things, or at least make things less worse. So we'll have declines and inclines. So ultimately, I think we'll get through the difficult times, but I don't perceive difficulties ever disappearing. It's not the nature of, I think, life. What's even worse for me to imagine is a heaven on earth. I can't imagine that. I think people would go nuts. I don't know. Maybe I'm really speaking out of church here. but I think there has to be a challenge and turmoil. Again, I'm not a New Age person. I ascribe to many of the New Age viewpoints because I think it's on track. It follows what I perceive reality is. But I don't think we'll end up in really bad shape in the long run. I think there'll be a tendency to survive, and we'll somehow to work out. What doesn't work out in one area of the world will pop out in another one as a positive. I keep thinking of the time the Berlin Wall came down. Who could have expected that to happen? Although I have to admit that one of our remote viewers did predict that. That was Ingo Swann. I give him credit for that one. He said, in another year, that wall will be down. And it was. So, but Gorbachev, it would be an example of something popping up unexpectedly. How could that have happened? The revolution basically from within. So, of course, there were other factors, economic, whatever, that really accelerated that. But he had the courage enough to come forward with a big new movement. So that may even happen in some of the other areas that have this continual war mentality in parochial views that are going on right now. So eventually, I think there'll be better times, but I don't think we're going to get to the point of nirvana here. What would we do if we didn't have something tough to fight with, or to argue with, or to struggle to overcome? What would we do?
That's an interesting question. Is there anything else that you would like to include in your chapter that we haven't touched on?
I think I've covered a lot, but I would say, as far as any insight that I might have, I feel personally, if we remain a good connection with the natural world, not much can go wrong. We have that attunement with nature, and that gives us kind of a all-encompassing, connecting feel. So whenever things are difficult, I think we all of us should retreat to some kind of natural place and retune, so to speak. So that would be one insight, if you will. Avoid distraction. My goodness, too many people are becoming so distracted over everything. So efforts to reduce that, which returning to a natural way of thinking, walk in a park, look at the river, that kind of thing, will help that. Being aware of the interconnectivity that we really all have, whether we are aware of it or not, I think ultimately will be extremely important for everybody, parents, children, adults, everybody. Our connection with animals is important. You see a lot in the news these days about help dogs. There's another term for that, I can't remember. But the role of animals, in being close to animals. I had an advantage growing up on the farm that city kids don't have. But I can see the value of that. So just being open and taking time to read good, motivating literature and poetry and good music. That's my insight, if anything, in terms of improving oneself, and that's really I think my number one interest is, and it has been, not just improving me, but improving other people. And then I think this is the purpose of what I write, and ultimately what's behind the workshops and presentations I give is really aimed at individuals and to motivate them to take a look and discover, keep the discovery mentality topmost in your mind, new learning, new discoveries. And that's the modus operandi, move forward, not backward.
Great. What I'll do is send you a list of people that I've interviewed and ask you if I've left anyone out that you think should be on the list.
Sure. Mm-hmm.